There's a new high man on Washington. Brett McMurphy's got him in the top 10?
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff, and today's episode is brought to you by Kalshi. For a limited time, download the Kalshi app and use code LOCKEDON to get $10 when you trade 10. And I got a really fun show coming at all you everydayers out there on this Friday. We're a little bit later on. We're going to go through some other notes because after an off day on Wednesday, the Huskies were back in action at fall camp on Thursday. Got a whole lot of notes that I want to take you through. See, all you everydayers out there on YouTube can see all the little notes in my horrible handwriting out there. So I also want to make sure we talk about some of the depth and the youth that we've seen from this Husky team throughout fall camp, because one of the very interesting things that I saw on Thursday morning before heading over to Montlake was the fact that On3's Brett McMurphy has Washington as the number 10 team in the country in his own individual rankings, where obviously On3 released their preseason poll on Wednesday and had the Huskies sitting at number 17, which feels fair, right? And all right, off the top, let's be clear. Brett McMurphy did not get everything right in his little write-up that he did of Washington. He talked about Jedd Fisch taking over as the play caller with Jimmy Doherty being gone. Obviously, we know that that's not the case. Jedd Fisch has been the play caller for the entirety of his time at Washington and will remain as such. He also got Washington's home record wrong at 7-1. They are 7-2 with the losses to Ohio State and Oregon last year. However, I think this is really fun. Personally, I think it's a little early to put the Huskies that high up in the rankings, but at the same time, it's kind of a best case scenario for the season, if you will, because this is something where all you everydayers out there know. When our good buddy Nick Lemkow and I went through our preseason projections a couple of weeks ago, I had Washington's preseason record prediction at 10-2 with losses to Indiana and Oregon at the end of the year. But that's one of those things where, you know, a couple of things break right. Maybe you win one of those games, drop something somewhere else. I don't know. This feels like a legitimate possibility for this team. And maybe it is a high-end projection, right? But it's something that we've talked a lot about on this show when you look at the depth and you look at the talent that this team has in so many different areas. And I feel like that starts in the trenches, where it's something that every single day we continue to see from this offensive line and the defensive line, and some of the battles that they've had in fall camp, where starting on the offensive side, where Kodi Greene just looks like someone that is going to fit right in Big Ten play. I don't know if it'll be to the level of John Mills, where that's just such a high bar to live up to as a true freshman who allowed 8 pressures during his first year of college football. Like that's a crazy high bar, but this coaching staff feels so confident in him. And if you've been out there at practice or just at all, I would say you have seen somebody who, yes, is making a freshman mistake here or there, but is very clearly playing a high level of football and is someone that physically, mentally, athletically has everything he needs to compete in the Big Ten. And so you combine that with some, again, veteran presence on the offensive line, Landon Hatchett when he returns, Drew Azzopardi, what you're going to get from him, and another guy who's got all conference upside in Champ Talialia. That's a really solid group. And then you look along the defensive line and what you're going to get along the interior from guys like Elenius Davis, these transfers into Deshaun Watson, Darren Conley, one person who, if you ask anybody around the program how excited they are about Kai McClendon, it's very, very hard to not get rave reviews of the Mississippi State transfer who just, flew under the radar in the portal because he missed the 2025 season with a torn ACL. But it's very, very important to remind you that that's a dude who started games in the SEC in 2024. And if he did play last season, it's something Jedd Fisch has talked about. I've spoken with several different sources about Kai, and it's just, no, that's a guy you need to buy stock in right now. So I feel very good about where that depth is along the interior, right? Derek Colman-Brusa is someone I can't wait to talk about a little bit later on in the show, where I think he had one of his best practices yet on Thursday. It's very clear the game is slowing down for him, but I want to talk about that later on partially because I have a clip here for all you everydayers out there of Tai Uyunglele, where this is just another one of those guys that when you think about what you're going to need a little bit more of on this defensive line, and truly you can just never have enough of, is veteran experience. And adding this kid back into the rotation, whether it be, he takes the 450 plus snaps that he did last year, maybe it's just 300 because you like what T.I. Mukais is giving you. You like what Derek Colman-Brusa is giving you, along with these other transfers, and Omar Khan, who's continuing to break his way into the rotation, plus Elenius Davis. That's a really solid group, and that's exactly what you need to succeed in this conference along the interior of the defensive line. It's that sort of depth, right? And it's something where, again, combining that with this group of edge rushers, where Ramzak Fruin continues to get reps with the first team defense. Russell Davis is somebody who's been, they're still playing it a little bit safe with him, limiting him in team drills just a little bit. But when he's out there, it's very clear he can be disruptive. Devin Hyde is working his way back. He got some reps with the second team unit today. It's Logan George, Jacob Lane. We've talked about how disruptive he can be. That group right there, plus Isaiah Ward, who's been a little bit limited early on in practice as well. There are so many guys that can make an impact. And yes, you want to see them take a step forward in production. But with the amount of depth you have in both of those rooms at this point in time, the rotation that you can utilize to keep all of those dudes fresh is so important. And it's something that plays into this ranking of, it might not necessarily be the most proven group, but you combine that defensive line with an extremely talented group of linebackers led by Jacob Manu, X-Ray Alexander, Zajas Renisale, Buda Alukta. That's one of the best, most experienced groups of linebackers in the country. And then what you're getting on the back end in returning starters like Ryland Dillard-Allen, who started games for you last year, Dylan Robinson, Rashawn Clark, the obvious, and Alex McLaughlin, and then adding in a transfer in Emmanuel Carnley. There's a significant amount of experience on this defense, and it's why yesterday we talked about why it can be one of the best units in the nation, as I'm sure all you everydayers remember. So I think about that group. And again, the pass rush that you're going to get from this unit of outside linebackers is such an important part of all of this in terms of creating pressure off the edge, and especially with the way that Ryan Walters runs this defense, there's so much that you can look for and just say, okay, yeah, I like where all of this is going. I think that maybe this Brett McMurphy projection, again, is on the high end of things, but that sort of defense with the offensive line, with what you can get out of Damon Williams in year 3, as Jedd Fisch continues to rave about him every single chance he gets, whether it's with us in the local media. He went on the Rich Eisen show. He's been on several different other podcasts in recent days and weeks. The Big Ten Network, when they came and did their UW preview earlier this week, same thing, where he's talking about how it's the best Damon has ever looked. And it's not just the physical stuff. It's the mental side of things. It's the leadership. It's knowing the play call before Jedd Fisch needs to even get it all out there, and knowing what needs to happen, getting the ball out of his hands quickly. All of those sorts of things contribute to taking that step forward. And the reason it's a high-end projection is, you got to figure out who's going to replace Denzel Boston. You've got to figure out who's going to replace Jonah Coleman and step up and give you that sort of production. But today was another fantastic day for Christian Moss at practice in that regard. He ripped off several chunk plays. I've got him down for a pair of 13-yard touchdowns as well. And it's something where it doesn't matter who he's working against. He's shown that he's big, physical, explosive, and is able to move all over the formation if need be, but is certainly going to be a very important role player in that X position that Washington is looking to replace Denzel Boston in specifically. And that's something that when we spoke to Jedd Fisch on Tuesday, he said, that's the guy who's certainly leading that competition right now. Jordan Clay has shown some promise as well, but it feels like Washington needed to go out and get a veteran in that spot to take a little bit off of Jordan Clay's plate and see what happened there. So I really like where this group of pass catchers is shaping up to be at this point in time, because if Christian Moss is that kind of guy who can tilt the field and, take a little bit off of Desmond Roebuck's plate as well, and not let the defense just clog up the middle of the field so much. Rasheed Williams is someone who continues to just look like a very, very reliable player at every single practice. All of those sorts of things are exactly what you need and exactly what you want from this offense, where Damon Williams is going to be asked to do so much more, and you don't know what the running game is going to look like just yet. So I think that with all of those things combined, I love this projection for Brett McMurphy. It's very fun. And as all you everydayers know, I've been very vocal this entire summer about, hey, look, there's a lot of talent on this team. And while it's young, while it's inexperienced, we could be having a very, very different conversation about this group by, let's say, the time the bye week rolls around after the Purdue game, right? Because if you're sitting there and you've got one loss, maybe it's at USC, or, my projection comes true, you win that game at USC, maybe you're sitting there at 6-7-0 at the bye. Like, those are the sorts of things that can really just help propel you toward that national conversation, towards the college football playoff rankings, all that sort of stuff that Jedd Fisch has been very vocal about wanting to get back towards in year 3 of this program. Now that there's so many more of just so much more, I should say, of the roster in place, of where he hopes it would be, and especially that depth and physicality in the trenches. And those are some things that really showed up during Thursday's practice, but there's so much more too, because the youth on this team is just so exciting. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Indeed, because support for today's episode comes from Indeed Sponsored Jobs. When workplace chaos hits and you need the right hire, Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps connect employers with candidates who match specific needs like skills, certifications, and location. So less time gets spent searching and more time gets spent finding the right fit. People are finding quality hires on Indeed right now. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. And this is something where usually the biggest difference isn't someone doing more work. It's having someone who knows exactly what needs to happen and helps everything run smoother. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners of the show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. So when I think depth and youth on this Husky team, the first position I think about is a cornerback. And you everydayers know it because we've talked about that position a lot over the last couple of weeks, and just some of the buzz that, you hear from the coaching staff, you hear from around the program of what this trio, especially of Jeron Jones, who got some first team reps today, Rahsjon Duncan, and Elijah Durr looks like, where Elijah was somebody who really impressed me today. And I've heard a lot of good things about him. I've noticed him doing a lot of special teams punt return stuff, which is something, as you everydayers might remember, we talked about over the summer, that because of his quick twitch athleticism and long speed, where he was a triple jump finalist in the state of Washington as a senior in high school. He was the Gatorade State Player of the Year last year. I think that he is someone in particular that I'm really intrigued to see what happens on the depth chart, because I think with where Jeron Jones is, with where this coaching staff is trying to get Rahsjon Duncan to be, since obviously he wasn't around for spring practice, he might be half a step behind, but he's gaining ground very, very quickly. Where today he had one of his better plays of the spring, where during a rep with the third team, he laid a big time hit on Sam Villadal over the middle of the field and forced a fumble. And John Richardson, Ryan Walters were pleased with what that looked like. But this group of corners in particular is something where I feel like it's a great theme of this Husky team as a whole, right? Where we've talked about it so much for several months now of, hey, look, yeah, these guys might not be proven. They might be true freshmen, or they might just not have a ton of game reps under their belt, depending on the position, depending on the discussion. But in terms of the talent, the athleticism, all of the things that you need to succeed in this, whether it be, again, in this particular case, with Ryan Walters on the defensive side of the ball, it's all there. And so I'm very excited to see what this might look like in terms of what Jeron Jones might be able to do to crack the depth chart, what Rahsjon Duncan might be able to do the exact same thing, because there's just so much young talent at that position where you feel really good about these starters in Emmanuel Carnley, in Dylan Robinson. But if something were to happen to one of them, like we saw last year with Tacario Davis, where he had to miss, 6 games with the various injuries that he had, and Dylan Robinson stepped in and did a great job, especially for a true freshman, right? So I think that that's something where this coaching staff feels very good about that particular unit of guys. And one group that coming into fall camp, there were a lot of questions about, was it running back? And so we've seen the majority of the first team reps go to Quaid Carr so far during spring ball. And keep in mind, this fall camp, this is the first day of full pads. So things looked a little bit different today. We saw Brian Bonner get a couple carries of that group as well. And Jayden Limar and Trey Cooley were both cleared to practice today. And they got very limited reps during the actual, 11-on-11 team period stuff. They did a decent amount in 7-on-7 and different roles like that. But it was very encouraging to see them back in the fold. So I'm curious what that room is going to look like moving forward, because the defense did a tremendous job on the goal line late in practice. And so that's something where I don't know if, Jayden Limar, Trey Cooley with their experience might get some more of those reps moving forward and into the season and so on. If Ansu Sanoe is going to be a guy where, at 6'2", 240 plus pounds, maybe he takes a major role on the goal line because of his size and his physicality. But with what we saw from Jayden Limar and Trey Cooley today, I'm very encouraged with what this running back room can look like moving forward. One of the best plays of the day for me was Trey Cooley took a rep, and I missed which player it was on defense, but he put a tremendous spin move on him to get a couple extra yards on a play right up the middle. And those are the sorts of things that, like, you listen to Scotty Graham talk about why he wanted Trey Cooley in the room. He talked about his speed, his elusiveness, his explosiveness. It's all right there. It's all on display. It's just frustrating for, a guy like that who's played in 2 games since the end of 2023. So it's just all a mystery. And it's something where if he comes back, it's exactly what Jedd Fisch talked about with him in the spring. Hey, that's a dude who, has played a lot of college football, has shown he can do it at a Power 4 level at both Georgia Tech and Louisville. And it's just something where it's unfortunate. He's been injured for the last couple of years, where he had the knee injury last year at Troy. He had a concussion that limited him to just 2 games in 2024 with Georgia Tech. So I'm curious to see what that share might look like moving forward, because with Quaid Carr, with Brian Bonner, I feel like Washington is extremely comfortable with where they are in the running back room, but you needed to have some level of veteran experience in that group to make sure that you just, took a little bit extra and went over the top with it. And that's why we spent so much time a little bit earlier talking about the defensive line, because, when you think depth, you think youth. I think Derek Colman-Brusa. And I think that this was one of his better practices, where we got a chance to speak to Jason Kafusi, Aaron Van Horn about the progression of the defensive line the other day, along with Linus Davis. And when talking about Derek and T.I. Mukais and some of these young guys that were able to participate in spring practice, one of the first things that they said about that group was, hey, this is a unit that, they spent a lot of time in the film room, and getting them up to speed with the physicality of Big Ten football during spring practice was so important. And now it was all about honing the mental side of things and getting up to the speed of the game itself. And one of the things that Linus Davis mentioned, along with Jason Kafusi, was that for Derek specifically, the game has really slowed down a lot for him. And I think that was very clear today, because the trench units were working on a stunt drill, where for the offensive line, it's about picking up, communicating, passing off blocks, doing different things like that. And for the defensive line, it's obviously about getting to the quarterback. And there was a rep where Derek looped around while working with the first team and showed off his power and ran straight through Colt Dietrich. And those are the sorts of things where I made a note of that rep specifically, because I think it's one of the best that I've seen from him at any point so far in his obviously very brief UW career. And it's one of those things where when you come around and make those havoc plays in the spring right away, it's so much harder to do that on the interior of the defensive line, and especially when you're working against the John Millses, the Champ Talialias of the world, right? So seeing Derek do that kind of thing, even in these drill settings where it's a little bit different than live action, is very, very important, because at 6'5", at close to 300 pounds, that dude is an extremely rare sort of athlete. And you want to find as many different ways to unlock him as you possibly can. And I think we saw the start of that during spring ball. And I think we'll see a whole lot more of that throughout fall camp and as we get into the season. But it's one of those things where, it takes time, and it comes back to a lot of these veterans, right? Where you don't want to have to put too much on his plate right away and say, hey, we need you to go out there and be the savior of the interior of this defensive line, because A, that's not fair. And B, that's extremely difficult for anyone to do, let alone a 17, 18-year-old true freshman. So I think that when I look at this defensive line and how Derek specifically fits in on it, I think we're going to see a whole lot of him as the season goes on. But I'm very curious with, some of the multiplicity that we've talked about from Ryan Walters' defense, what that might look like in his role specifically, and how much of that might be, oh yeah, we want him out there on first and second down for, a lot of more, run heavy sort of stuff, versus, okay, maybe, him, Ramzak Fruin, who just continues to impress every single day. We want to put them out there in some more pass rush specific situations at first and take advantage of their athleticism, in Derek's case, especially against some of these slower interior offensive linemen. So I'm very curious to see how some of those things might work out as the season goes along. And it's something else that, when I think about just this defense as a whole and the effort and the motor that so many of these guys play with, it really showed up at all 3 levels of the field today. And it's something where obviously there's still, a couple of things to clean up there. But I wanted to play this clip from Taylor Mays, where he did a really great job of reviewing just what we saw from the defense on the first day of full pads.
I was just telling our players that get out here and pads, and it's warm, and it's a long practice, a lot of reps. It felt very game-like to me. Felt kind of like Michigan last year. Just telling those guys that we get in these situations where it's live bullets. We got to be able to fall back on our technique and be able to fall back on the coaching points and just do our job, right? And so being out here today, we did some things well, but then there's just so much room for improvement coming off this first practice. But it's first practice in full pads, so I would expect it to be better going forward.
I really love that clip because it's just one of those things of, yeah, there's a certain level of you still need to get comfortable. But with this defense specifically, with some of the things that we see in terms of the way they swarm to the football and the way that, we see all three levels of guys, going over and blowing up screenplays. There are a couple of different times where Washington's offense tried to set up some screens, and just the speed and the physicality of this defense shut them down before they could even get started. And obviously there's always something to be said for, hey, of course the defense is going to, know this offensive playbook really well. They see it every single day, right? So I'm not saying that from a standpoint of you need to read too much into this. You need to be concerned about the offense for one reason or another. No, it's just something where we continue to see this every single day, no matter who's out there, because it's something where for a couple of young guys like Donovan Robinson and Gavin, they had tremendous practices. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Kalshi. Before the season even kicks off, everyone's making predictions. Who wins the division? Who makes the playoffs? Who's lifting the trophy at season's end? On Kalshi, America's #1 prediction market platform, you can trade those predictions in a live market. And this is something where, will the Seattle Seahawks go back-to-back? Will they find a way to win the championship once again this season? Obviously, it's going to be really tough. And right now, they're trading at a 9% probability, meaning a $100 trade would pay out $1,174 if they're able to clinch the trophy for a second straight year. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position, trade the draft pick, the game, and more on Kalshi. Download the Kalshi app and use code LOCKEDON to get $10 when you trade 10. Kalshi, Kalshi. Trade on anything. 18 plus only. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Kalshi products are not available in all jurisdictions. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. And we've got a message from our good friends over at Odoo. Running a business shouldn't feel like you're trying to connect a bunch of systems that were never designed to work together. One app for accounting, another for inventory, another for sales, and somehow none of them talk to each other. That's where Odoo comes in. Odoo is an all-in-one business management software that brings every part of your business together in one powerful platform. From sales and accounting to inventory and marketing, everything works in one place, helping your team move faster, stay organized, and focus on growing the business instead of managing software. The best organizations know that success isn't just about talent, it's about having everyone working toward the same goal. And that's true in sports, just like it is in business. And that's something where you can see that on Washington's defense, where all three levels between the defensive line, the linebackers, the secondary, they're all working in perfect sync. And this is something where the adjustment itself from, going from year 1 and year 2 to Ryan Walters was very important. But what's really impressed me was how smoothly it's been implemented and how well everyone's working together, because everyone knows their role. Everyone's on the same page. And that's usually what separates good organizations from great ones. Great organizations win because operations matter. And that's why you should get Odoo. Try for free today at odoo.com/lockedon. That's odoo.com/lockedon. Sticking on the defensive side for a couple of minutes here, the first person I want to talk about is somebody who I have written down like 4 or 5 different spots in my notes. That's linebacker Donovan Robinson, where he got a couple opportunities to work with the second team defense today, and he was flying around and he was all over the place. And it was something where it's not necessarily like, oh, he had a pick here, a pick there, or forced fumble here. No, but on every single play where he was out there, that dude was in the middle of things. And it's something where you go back and you look at just kind of the addition of him late in the when you already had a couple of linebackers committed, I should say, in the 2025 class. And it's okay. Yeah, this is a dude who's big, long, really athletic at 6'3", 220 pounds. And now you're starting to see the fruits of that labor, because this linebacker room is not just, you don't just have that high end talent. There's a ton of depth in this room too, where I've been really impressed with Isaiah Tokyo through spring practice into fall camp as well. He is someone who, you just see why Washington is really excited about him. And this is a guy where, kind of a lot like Donovan Robinson, I don't expect him to maybe make a big impact this year outside of potentially some work on special teams. But in a year when Jacob Manu graduates, Budal Lukta might be able to graduate, move on to the NFL. X-Ray Alexander will have another year if he wants it, kind of deal. Maybe Isaiah Tokyo steps into the role that Donovan Robinson is playing right now, where, whoa, this is a big, promising athlete who certainly flies around, can play multiple spots in this defense if need be, but that's a dude where if you want to stick him at Mike linebacker, he's got plenty of range. He played safety in high school. He returned some kicks, played some wide receiver. That's a guy who's a lot of fun to watch, and I've been very, very impressed watching him get a little bit of an increased opportunity as well. So that's a dude I'm really looking forward to seeing how he continues to progress, because this is a year where, again, you might not hear much from him, if people stay healthy at linebacker with that level of talent and what that room looks like specifically. But that's a guy where if in 2027 he's contending for a starting job, don't be shocked about that. And it's the same thing with Gavin Day next year, right? Where this is a guy that had his best practice yet. He got some opportunities with the first team defense as well on Thursday, and he made the most of his opportunities. This is a kid who's big, long, athletic. Again, it's all those same monikers, right? But 6'3", 205, 210 pounds, whatever he's listed at this point in time. That dude's got so much range, and you're starting to see the instincts and coverage and some of that show up today, where he was able to make an interception during a red zone drill today, right on the goal line, where Justice Williams just ran a little stop route right there. But Gavin Day was able to step in front of a pass from Treston Keeney-McMillan, take it way back to midfield before he got pushed out of bounds. Those are the kinds of things that are really exciting to see. And what's why we've talked about him so much as a potential candidate for that third safety role, because he has all of those features that you're looking for. And those are the sorts of things that obviously, different size of players and a little bit of a different skill set in that regard. But those are the sorts of things that set Rylan Dillard-Allen apart last spring and last fall. And thinking about that intensity, that physicality, what he brings to the table, it's very, very exciting to see what kind of depth he continues to add to this defense as well, where it's why we've continued to harp so much on this show of these 2026 guys that can step in right away and make a big time impact in the secondary if need be. And you don't need to, at least right now, count on them to fill massive roles, right? Like, you're not asking him to step in and start right now. You're not asking that from Jeron Jones or Rahsjon Duncan. But if you're able to ease these dudes in, it's something where you look at some of these positions and who could be going off to the NFL next season, like Alex McLaughlin with the 5-for-5. He does have another year if need be, but with a strong season, that guy is probably going to go off and be an NFL draft pick. So I think that it's one thing where Washington is trying at so many different spots to continue to just groom these guys to be full-time starters, maybe this year if something goes wrong, if there's an injury or whatever, but you never want to, plan for that or talk about that sort of stuff. But down the line, it's something I remember talking about so often during spring and fall camp of last year, whenever Alex McLaughlin and Rylan Dillard-Allen would be the two safeties on the field together. I would just, point at whoever's next to me and just, hey, that's your 2026 starting safety duo right there. And I feel like we could see that exact same thing come next fall in Gavin and RDA. So I'm very curious to see what that might look like, but I want to flip over to the offensive side here for a couple of minutes. And one guy that I really wanted to talk about is Chris Lawson, because he got an extra opportunity today with the first team offense. And he was someone where he made some big time plays. He had a nice connection with Damon Williams for a 35 yard gain a little bit earlier in practice. And then one play later on that he took as well was Washington has tried running a little sweep to him, and he turned up field and just showed off some vision and the awareness that we talk about so often when it comes to Chris. And he exploded downfield for like 40 yards and got pushed down at the 5 yard line. I want to say it was just hard to see from the vantage point that I had. But this is one of those guys where I continue to talk about Chris Lawson so often, because it's another one of these things, right? Where this is, yes, a blue chip recruit who came in, played a little bit as a freshman, but could have had a much bigger role last year if health wasn't a factor. And it was just unfortunate that he was limited to the 10 catches for 110 yards. And it was a nice little, moniker of like what he can do. And hey, okay, maybe we're going to look forward to more of this next year. And obviously with what Desmond Roebuck did last season, you're not going to be unseating him. Rasheed Williams is going to be given every opportunity, because that's somebody that Washington was hoping was going to step into a bigger role next year, or or last year, excuse me, but wasn't able to because of injuries. And then, of course, you had Denzel Boston. So, that is what it is. But looking at what Chris can be this year is a very exciting thought and a very exciting, just real addition of depth to the offense is probably the best way to put it, because he's someone where if you need him to step in and start, I have full faith that he'd be able to do that. But more likely than not, he's going to be a rotational piece this year. And if that kind of player is your fourth wide receiver, and with the amount of chemistry that he shows off with DeMond Williams Jr., the awareness in short areas, and the knowledge to, okay, I see my quarterback moving this way, I'm going to continue to run with him, and I have the field to be able to, sit down and find a soft spot in the zone, or know the linebacker is moving this way and I can try to get behind him, those sorts of things. We see those a lot from Chris, whether it be in the 7-on-7 periods, the 11-on-11s, and on a day like today where you see more extended versions of that. It's very refreshing, because it was really frustrating to see him miss so much of spring with an injury and so much of last fall with just some of these minor nagging things as well. So to see him healthy is just a really nice sign of where this offense can continue to go. So I want to keep a close eye on a lot of those things as camp continues to progress, where it sounds like Friday will be a little bit of a lighter day because there's going to be sort of a scrimmage on Saturday with a whole lot more team stuff as we continue to move closer and closer to the season. But that's all I got for you today, for all your ideas out there. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. If you like what we have to offer here on Locked On Huskies, please make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure to click that like button, click that little bell, so you don't miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Monday.